Good morning, everyone. The subcommittee will come to order. We have a total of 9 bills before us and a host of witnesses, so I promise to keep my opening statement brief. 2 of the 9 bills before us today are bills I introduced earlier this year. The first is H.R. 631, the Service Members' Choice and Transition Act of 2013, which I introduced with Ranking Member Takano. This bill is meant as a follow-on to the Vow to Hire's HERO Act that would improve the Transition Assistance Program, or TAP as we call it, for separating service members. The VOW Act made TAP mandatory for all but a very few service members, and since the enactment of that bill, the services and the administration have nearly completed an overhaul of the TAP program for the first time in decades. From what I have heard from veterans and my staff, though, the new curriculum is much improved, but more can be done. DoD has created several tracks or courses for service members that focus on some of the most common transition paths that service members take when separating. These tracks focus on the following areas: education, VOTEC, employment, and entrepreneurship. These tracks are meant to provide in-depth knowledge on these topics and allow service members the choice in picking training that best fits their transition goals. Unfortunately, that option is not included in the mandatory portion of TAP. For example, if a veteran was planning to go to college and use their post-9/11 GI Bill, the education track would help them decide whether they are ready for post-secondary education, and if not, how to get ready. This will allow them to determine what should be their education or training goal, what schools would be best to meet their education or training goal, how to complete the admissions process, and finally, how to finance their education or training. As you can see from this slide on the screen, the post-9/11 GI Bill benefit can provide over $270,000 over 4 years at one of the most expensive schools in the country, in this case, Stanford University. If taxpayers are going to provide this generous benefit, it is our duty to ensure that our military men and women and our veterans know how to make the best use of this benefit. As I said, from everything we have heard from DoD, and as they will shortly testify to as well, they will not require that these tracks be part of the mandatory portion of TAP. As a non-mandatory option, service members could take the optional track only if their supervisor would allow them to miss more days of work or if they don't meet the still undefined career readiness standards. Regarding these standards, how could we expect a commanding officer to reasonably determine whether a service member's individual transition plan accurately reflects the attainable objectives given the infinite variations in a member's life? Therefore, I believe that H.R. 631 would fill that gap by making the optional tracks of the mandatory portion of TAP, while making the optional tracks part of the mandatory portion of TAP, while giving the services the flexibility to meet these requirements. As you can see on the screen, the model I'm proposing provides each service member with an executive summary of each track, followed by time to take the track of their choice, along with the classes on VA benefits and service-specific separation counseling. The model shows 5 days, but it could be done in 7 or 8 days, whatever it takes to get the job done. It's important to note that this model is based off the system that the Marines have been piloting with great success for some time. My second bill, H.R. 1316, seeks to codify the roles and responsibilities of Directors of Veteran Employment and Training, or DVETs as they're known. DVETs are federal employees who represent the Veterans Employment and Training Service on the state level and whose primary responsibility is to oversee the DVOPs and leavers who are funded by the Jobs for Veterans State Grant Program. Curiously, Title 38 contains no specific responsibilities for the DVETs. It only says that there shall be DVETs and assistant DVETs. The performance of the DVOPs and LVERS programs continues to be a topic of concern for this committee. And by codifying the responsibilities of DVETs, we will strengthen their position with the state to improve the performance of the DVOPs and LVERS, something I am sure that we agree must happen. With that, I'm happy to yield to the ranking member, Mr. Takano, for any opening statement he may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us, and I'd like to thank our witnesses for taking the time to testify and answer our questions. We have a number of bills before us today which extend or redefine important veterans programs like the post-9/11 GI Bill, veterans vocational rehabilitation and retraining, transition assistance, work study, and participation in U.S. Paralympics programs, among others. Let's take a breath after all that list of programs we're going to cover. I want to thank Chairman Flores for introducing H.R. 631, which I have co-sponsored. I support this bill, and I'm interested in making the optional tracks in the Transition Assistance Program mandatory. The bill requires that additional time be spent helping warriors understand the educational training and employment resources they have earned and how and where to access them. Mr. Chairman, I want to highlight two bills that I have sponsored. The first one is the Vet Success Enhancement Act of H.R. 844, which extends by 5 years the time period when veterans with service-connected disabilities are eligible to enroll in VA vocational education and rehabilitation programs. Veterans with traumatic brain injury or spinal cord injury often require years to complete rehabilitation and adjust to their new realities of the basic activities of daily living. Once this has been achieved, those who wish to return to work and need vocational rehabilitative services have often passed the current 12-year eligibility period. And many other veterans do not become aware of this program until they are no longer eligible. My legislation will give these veterans 5 additional years to receive this help. The second bill I've introduced is the Work Study for Student Veterans Act. It is a 5-year extension of the Veterans Work Study Program at the Department of Veterans Affairs. As an educator and community college trustee, I know how important these programs are to students, allowing them to earn a little extra cash to live on while they attend school. The VA program pays veterans to assist other transitioning veterans in navigating VA's claims and benefits system. It is an important program to veteran students in my district and to thousands of others in schools across the country. Without my legislation, it will expire at the end of June. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for scheduling this hearing to review these bills. I look forward to the testimony and the discussion we will have today.
Thank you, Mr. Chicano. I also am happy to co-sponsor your work study program bill with you, and I think it will be a great opportunity to improve our veteran services.
Thank you.
We will now hear from any other members who wish to make opening statements about the bills they have introduced or for anything else related to this hearing. Any? Mr. Kaufman?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Chairman Flores and Ranking Member Chicano, for holding this legislative hearing today. And I'm pleased to have my 2 pieces of legislation be a part of the discussion. The first bill, which I introduced along with Representative Mark Chicano, is H.R. 1402, the Veteran Paralympic Act. The bill would extend through the 2018 fiscal year a joint program operated by the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs and the U.S. Olympic Committee that funds grants to host to a host of adaptive sports programs for disabled veterans across the country. The Veterans Paralympic Act will ensure that disabled veterans in local communities throughout the country continue to have opportunities for rehabilitation, stress release, and higher achievement through adaptive sports. The U.S. Olympic Committee's Paralympic Chief, Charlie Hubner, who will testify today, has said he is proud to support its reauthorization. I am proud to lead the effort to extend and support this important program. Additionally, my bill, H.R. 1412, the Improving Job Opportunities for Veterans Act of 2013, seeks to increase the availability of on-the-job training and apprenticeship programs to help veterans make the transition to the civilian workforce. This legislation will build on an existing, yet little known and understood, underutilized on-the-job training program that assists veterans by allowing them to use their educational benefits that they've earned through their military service to learn a trade or a skill by participating in an approved apprenticeship or on-the-job training program. There are three pillars of the legislation. First, this bill will highlight this program by requiring the Secretary of Veterans Affairs to initiate a public information campaign about the availability of on-the-job training programs for eligible veterans. Second, the bill will decrease the final percentage of the veteran's salary paid by the employer from 85% to 75% as a means to further incentivize employers to participate. And lastly, the legislation will expand this training program by opening it up to agencies of the federal government, including the VA. This bill will be a great tool for both private sector and federal employees to hire our veterans who are struggling to make that transition from the military to the civilian workforce. I want to thank all the panelists, and I look forward to hearing their thoughts, as well as those of the other members of the committee on these important bills. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Kaufman. I ask unanimous consent that Chairman Miller, the chairman of the full committee, be permitted to sit at the dais and ask questions. Hearing no objections, so ordered. And now recognize Chairman Miller to talk about his bill, H.R. 357, or for any other purpose.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate you holding this hearing and giving me the opportunity to talk to you just a little bit. With your permission, I'd like to respond to some of today's written testimony on H.R.s 357 and 631. And let me first begin by saying state schools, and I'm a proud graduate of a state college, really can't have it both ways. First, the intent of my bill is to expand education opportunities for veterans by making all public schools more affordable, and that Dr. Aldridge's testimony, in my opinion, is factually wrong in stating that veterans already enrolled in an institution would be denied GI Bill benefits through my bill. The bill is really clear in stating that their benefits will continue. The denial applies only to enrollments after the effective date. Second, while it may be difficult to change residency requirements, it's an opportunity for the appropriate governing bodies and those bodies that determine tuition rates to recognize the contribution of the 1% who defend the 99%. And in my view, it's the least that the 99% can do for veterans. Thirdly, Dr. Aldridge's statement that veterans could be forced to seek other, likely costlier programs is exactly what this bill is designed to prevent. According to the College Board, the average non-resident tuition rate at public four-year schools is $21,706, while resident rates average $8,655. That's an average of 250% increase over in-state tuition rates, and in many states the increase is about 300% for non-residents. My bill would reduce what is often a $24,000 tuition and fee bill to under $9,000 on average. Dr. Aldridge also expresses concern about confusion. That will only happen if a school doesn't make residency requirements clear during the admissions process. And more importantly, the passage of H.R. 357 will remove any confusion. A school will either be approved or not approved for new enrollments under the GI Bill. Regarding how tuition is determined, Dr. Aldridge is suggesting that veterans be treated less favorably than many non-resident non-veterans. Take this for an example. 46 of 50 states belong to one of 4 regional compacts which give significant tuition discounts at state institutions to non-resident students from states within that very regional compact. For example, the Southern Regional Education Board offers in-state rates to students from the 16 states. Students from the 15 states who are enrolled in schools in the Western Undergraduate Exchange Program pay 150% of the in-state rate. Students from the 9-state Midwestern Student Exchange Program also pay the 150% rate at participating state schools and even get a 10% discount at many private institutions. And finally, students from the 6 states in the New England Regional Student Program receive an average tuition discount of almost $7,000. Also of note, Some states have adopted legislation to allow children of undocumented immigrants to attend at in-state rates. In its broadest application, my bill would simply encourage a national approach to what many states are doing already on their own. And in the end, it's the right thing to do for our veterans. So, despite Dr. Aldridge's concerns about overreaching in the state's rights, I would remind her that federal dollars usually come with requirements, whether mandating that states provide in-state rates for active duty service members, a drinking age of 21 as a condition to receive federal highway funding, or federal contributions to states for Medicaid, just to name a few. And finally, while I really do appreciate Dr. Aldridge's suggestions, 2 of the 4 proposals would require additional federal funds to the states, another example of wanting it both ways. Since the post-9/11 GI Bill already pays full tuition and fees at state schools, it eliminates the need for state schools to participate in the Yellow Ribbon program for most veterans. I would note that VA is now already investing $11.5 billion in post-secondary education and training, and I believe our colleges and universities are benefiting just as much as are our veterans. Briefly, a couple of thoughts, if I might, Mr. Chairman, on H.R. 631. I find the testimony from the 3 departments really short-sighted, to put it mildly. The failure of the model imposed on the services to include detailed training on the tracks as part of the mandatory curriculum, especially the education track, is a disservice to both the soon-to-be veteran and the taxpayer alike. And additionally, for an administration that has made so much about what they describe as schools preying on veterans, I find the reluctance to include the tracks as part of the mandatory curriculum totally inconsistent with those concerns. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I wholeheartedly support your legislation and that legislation that is being heard of today. Thank you so much for letting me speak out of order, and I yield back my time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for joining us today. Congresswoman Kirkpatrick, any opening remarks? Okay, thank you. Anybody else on our side? Mr. Winstrup.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Ranking Member Takano. I rise today in support of H.R. 1305, which is a bill to help veterans gain access to vital job training programs. Currently, homeless veterans are eligible for job training and placement services under the Homeless Veterans Reintegration Program. Unfortunately, the Department of Labor concluded that veterans who are participating in the HUD VASH voucher program, which is the Veterans Affairs Supportive Housing voucher program, are not considered truly homeless. And therefore, they're ineligible for the very program that will help them re-enter the workforce and get them back on their feet. You know, our troops are people of action, and our veterans have sacrificed deeply for our country. And we shouldn't let Washington bureaucracy stand in the way of assisting those who need help the most. This legislation will help homeless veterans find housing and meaningful employment and elevate themselves out of poverty into self-sufficiency, free from government dependence. So I urge your support of this, and Mr. Chairman, I yield back my time.
Thank you, Mr. Winstrup. Mr. Cook?
No comment.
Mr. Runyon? And I believe that's it. So I will thank the members, and I will now introduce our first panel. Our first witness will be Mr. Curtis Coy from the VA, who is accompanied by Danny Pummel. Next, we will have Dr. Susan Kelly from the Department of Defense. Finally, we will have Mr. Keith Kelly from the Department of Labor. Mr. Kelly is the new Assistant Secretary for Veterans Employment and Training. Congratulations to you, Mr. Secretary, and welcome. Each of you will have 5 minutes to summarize your testimony, and your complete written statement will be made part of the hearing record. Thanks to each of you for being here, and let's start with Mr. Coy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Takano, and other members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss VA's views on pending legislation. As you noted, Mr. Chairman, accompanying me this morning is Mr. Danny Pummel, Director of the VBA DoD Program Office. We appreciate the committee's attention to the important subjects that these bills cover, particularly with respect to TAP, leveraging post 9/11 GI Bill, changes to VRAP, vocational rehabilitation programs, and the continuation of Veterans Paralympics program. In the interest of time, I will highlight and summarize a few points from my written statement. VA is happy to support H.R. 844, the Vet Success Enhancement Act, which would extend to 17 years for enrollment in VA vocational rehabilitation employment services. That will allow VA to provide those eligible individuals the help they need over a longer period of time. We are also pleased to support H.R. 1402, which will allow VA to continue its support for adaptive sports programs for disabled veterans and disabled service members. These programs offer remarkable and inspiring opportunities for those who have sacrificed for our country. Turning to other bills on the committee's agenda, H.R. 357, the GI Bill Tuition Fairness Act, would direct VA to disapprove courses of education provided by public institutions of higher education that do not charge veteran students tuition and fees at an in-state rate, regardless of their state of residence. While VA is sympathetic to the issue of rising educational costs, it is difficult to endorse the proposed legislation until we know more about the impact. We'd be happy to work with the committee and our educational partners to better understand how this might affect or limit veterans in their course or school offerings. H.R. 562 would extend VRAP for an additional 3 months through 30 June 2014. It would also require an interim report on the program not later than 30 days after the date of the bill's enactment. We support extending VRAP. The additional 3 months would give vets additional time to complete their degree or certificate program. We do, however, recommend a longer period of time to submit the interim report for the called for in the bill. Allowing VA and DOL additional time to collect sufficient data will ensure the most accurate reporting of VRAP successes. H.R. 631, the Service Members' Choice and Transition Act of 2013, would amend the TAP program, which would provide employment and job training and assistance and related services for service members separating from the active duty and for their spouses. It would add a new subsection imposing specific requirements in statute for TAP's format and content. We appreciate the strong interest and support from the committee to ensure departing service members are given full and effective engagement on their benefits and employment and training opportunities as they separate from active duty. However, we cannot offer VA support for this legislation as we believe current initiatives with the same aims, including the Vow to Hire Heroes Act and the Veterans Employment Initiative, should be given the opportunity to be fully implemented and assessed before embarking upon further legislation. We would be pleased to brief the committee on the implementation of TAP as part of VEI and to work with the members to continue to improve and enhance the program. Public Law 107-103 established a 5-year pilot program to expand qualifying work-study programs to include outreach programs with state approving agencies, administration activities at national and state veterans, cemeteries, and assisting them with the provision of care to veterans in state homes. This program is currently due to expire on 30 June of this year. This draft bill would extend VA for these activities for an additional 5 years. VA does not oppose this legislation, but would prefer the legislation provide a permanent authorization for these work-study activities. Finally, improving job opportunities for Veterans Act of 2013 would amend VA's on-the-job training programs. The legislation would temporarily adjust the percentage of starting wages an employer must provide by the end of the program from 85 to 75%. VA believes this change could help increase training opportunities for veterans. As well, the draft bill would provide VA to enter into agreements with other federal agencies to operate their own OJT programs. VA supports the intent of this section, however, we do not believe it is necessary, as VA has been able to strike numerous agreements with federal agencies for OJT under the authority we now have. There are 2 other provisions in the bill which VA will provide its views on in a follow-up letter to the committee. Mr. Chairman, that concludes my statement. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. We would be pleased to respond to any questions you may have or other members of the subcommittee.
Thank you, Mr. Coy.
Yes, sir.
Dr. Kelly.
Good morning, Chairman Flores, Ranking Member Takano, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today, joined by my colleagues from the Department of Veterans Affairs and Labor, and to share the Department of Defense's views on the legislation being considered by this subcommittee. My remarks this morning will be limited to H.R. 631, the Service Members' Choice and Transition Act of 2013. which would amend Section 1144 of Title 10 United States Code pertaining to the Transition Assistance Program, or TAP. The Department's cost estimate for this bill is currently under development. As you know, TAP is the cornerstone of the Department's transition efforts and is a collaborative partnership among the DoD, the VA, and DOL. It is the primary platform used to deliver an array of services and benefits information to our separating service members. While we believe the intent of H.R. 631 is to improve the transition process for separating service members, we have concerns over how it would, if enacted, contradict the requirements of the Vow to Hire Heroes Act of 2011, codified in Chapter 58, Title 10 U.S. Code. The VOW Act was intended to prepare transitioning service members to join and be competitive in the labor market by using the skills, knowledge, and experience they've acquired during military service. The Department is unable to support this bill, as we believe it would not only undermine the progress already made in the redesign of the TAP, but would also potentially disadvantage our service members and our ability to ensure they are career ready upon separation from the military. The redesigned TAP, including a new curriculum called Transition GPS, Goals, Plans, Success, is aligned with the VOW Act, which requires all service members discharged or released from active duty after serving their first 180 continuous days or more to participate in pre-separation counseling, VA benefits briefings, and the DOL employment workshop. With limited exemptions, the VOW Act requires the DOL employment workshop to be a mandatory portion of the TAP. H.R. 631 conflicts with the VOW Act by making the employment workshop an optional track for separating service members. The Department agrees with the original intent of the VOW Act that all service members benefit from taking the employment workshop, regardless of their immediate plans upon leaving military service, because they will need job search skills at some point. The heart of the redesigned TAP is the Career Readiness Standards, or CRS. The standards correspond to deliverables that all service members must meet prior to separation. The value of the CRS in ensuring service members have the tools they need to become productive members of our labor workforce cannot be overstated. The employment workshop currently requires 3 full days of adult learning instruction, which would be limited to 2 days under the optional election prescription of H.R. 631. The shortened time frame reduces the ability of the employment workshop to provide the needed job search skills for our service members to meet the new CRS. The prescriptive time frame reduces the ability of the entire redesigned TAP to evolve into the military life cycle TAP and mature to keep pace with changes in adult learning, to adjust to include skills building that our service members tell us they need, and respond to developments in the job search arena. The DoD, military departments, and our interagency partners are successfully implementing the redesigned TAP to enable our service members to meet career readiness standards. DoD believes that the best course of action at this time is to continue the implementation of the newly redesigned TAP in accordance with the VOW Act and the recommendations of the Veterans Employment Initiative Task Force. We will continue to work with your staff to keep this subcommittee updated on our progress. Mr. Chairman, that concludes my statement. On behalf of the men and women in the military and their families, I thank you and the members of this subcommittee for your steadfast support and your leadership in this important area. I am happy to answer any questions you or the other members of the subcommittee may have.
Thank you, Dr. Kelly. Secretary Kelly.
Good morning. Good morning, Chairman Flores and Ranking Member Takano, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to participate in today's hearing on the pending legislation. My name is Keith Kelly, and I'm honored to serve as the Assistant Secretary for the Veterans Employment and Training Service at the Department of Labor. I look forward to working with each of you to ensure that the brave men and women who serve this country have the support they need to succeed in the civilian workforce. I will use my time here today to highlight some of the Department's views on the labor-related legislation before the committee. I respectfully defer to my colleagues here at the table from DoD and VA on the remaining pieces of legislation.
First, I'd like to discuss H.R. 562, the VRAP Extension Act of 2013, which would extend by 3 months an important program created by the VOW Act. Labor has been working diligently with the VA and others to implement VRAP, and specifically by conducting research, developing guidance, identifying high-demand occupations, verifying applicants' initial eligibility, and providing services to veterans before, during, and after they participate in the VRAP. The Department supports this legislation. However, we recommend limiting any interim report to include administrative data only. We defer to the VA on the best elements and time frame for the submission of this report. The next bill I'd like to discuss is H.R. 631, the Service Members' Choice of Transition Act of 2013. This legislation would amend the Transition Assistance Program, as we all refer to and commonly know as TAP, under Section 1144 of Title 10. TAP is an interagency effort designed to provide transitioning service members and their spouses with the support they need to successfully transition to the civilian workforce. As part of TAP, the Department provides a comprehensive 3-day employment workshop at U.S. military installations worldwide. The Department has serious concerns with H.R. 631, and I'd like to highlight a few of them. First, the Department of Labor is concerned that the legislation would impede labor's efforts to fulfill our obligations under the VOW Act, which made participation mandatory for most transitioning service members. In addition, the VOW Act mandated that we transition to all contractor facilitation to ensure a standardized curriculum, which we have just done. Labor is also concerned that H.R. 631 would impede the implementation of the new employment workshop, again working with our fellow agencies, as well as the interagency transition GPS training and delivery model. The Department has been working with our fellow agencies and others for the past several years to completely redesign the employment workshop. And during that process, the Department sought input from a variety of sources and conducted numerous pilot programs, curriculum reviews, and surveys to ensure that we developed the best possible product. We also worked with the VEI task force to incorporate the new curriculum into the GPS model as a 3-day transition program for separating service members. In the last few months, we rolled out the new curriculum in all the military installations worldwide. While the preliminary results have been very positive, Labor remains committed to working with this committee to continually review and update the curriculum. As a result, the Department believes this legislation is unnecessary and would negatively impact transitioning service members at this time. The third bill I'd like to discuss is H.R. 1305, which would expand eligibility for the Homeless Veterans Reintegration Program, commonly known as HVRP, to include incarcerated veterans and veterans participating in the VA HUD Supportive Housing Program. The Department supports this legislation, which would allow Labor to be responsive to the service needs of all these populations. And finally, I'd like to address H.R. 1316. This legislation would amend Section 4103 of Title 38 and legislatively prescribe the duties of our state directors for Veterans Employment and Training, better known as DVETs. The Department appreciates the intent of this legislation. However, Labor is concerned that as drafted, H.R. 1316 would unduly prescribe the duties of our DVETs and remove much of the managerial flexibility. Moreover, many parts of the bill are duties that DVETs already perform, which are assessed as a part of their annual performance appraisal. Finally, the Department is concerned that this legislation will be problematic to implement. So in conclusion, as members of the committee and the subcommittee know, over the next 5 years, 1 million service members will transition from active duty to civilian life. And we do owe them the best possible services and benefits our nation can provide. The Department of Labor is firmly committed to working with this committee and others to fulfill that sacred obligation. That concludes my statement. I'd be pleased to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Secretary Kelly, and I thank all of you for your testimony today. Let's start with the questioning if we can, and I will begin. The first question is for Dr. Kelly. As we talked about in my opening statement, the Marine Corps has a model that is working fairly well, and that's reflected in H.R. 631. Are you saying that the model that has been successfully implemented by the Marine Corps is less effective in preparing service members than that that's being imposed on the DoD by the DOD on the services?
Actually, DOD, you use the term imposing. The services were at the table in developing this entire curriculum. And we started with the basics of what we wanted the service members to separate with as they became veterans. That set the baseline for the career readiness standards. So we started with career readiness standards, and then we developed the curriculum to provide the skills building that the service members needed to provide the deliverables to meet the career readiness standards. That's how all of the curriculum was developed, and the services were all engaged in that. So the imposition in reference to the decision type memorandum was the curriculum developed with the services coordinated on the decision type memorandum across the board, and that is the format that they have been implementing. As far as success, I don't think we are there defining what model is successful yet. That's exactly my concern. We are only in the middle, or actually we're just starting implementing the transition GPS. We have only piloted the transition GPS core curriculum. We have not fully piloted the 3 tracks that were developed by the task force. We are going to be piloting those across the next several months, assessing those just as we did rigorously in the core curriculum, take the results of those track pilots, modify those curriculums, and then launch them fully. We have until October of 2013 to do that. So the assessment of success of the Marine model has not yet been determined, is the bottom line. So I just caution you on that particular assumption. The curriculum with all of the tracks, as well as the capstone event, have not been fully assessed yet. We need time to do that, which is exactly the point of my concern. We need time to implement. We need time to fully assess the curriculum across all of the services, and how each one of the services choose to implement the capstone also. There are pieces that are not yet fully in place. So that is my concern.
One of the things you mentioned was career readiness standards, and so the question is, what are career readiness standards? And I have sort of a rhetorical question to go with that, and that is, would you consider a service member who intends to attend college after separation, but who has not been allowed to attend the new education track, as being ready for transition? Does that fit the definition of career readiness standards?
That is a very good question. I thank you for that. The service member who is choosing to use their post-9/11 GIL, or who is planning or exploring that option to use their post-9/11 GI Bill, either in higher education or in a technical training institute, chooses that path. That means they've chosen those career readiness standards that they have to meet. So we expect them to provide the deliverables to show that they are career ready in the path that they have chosen. They choose the path that they're going to take. They provide those deliverables. But those are the paths that the tracks that we're talking about right now: higher education, technical training, and entrepreneurship. Those tracks are in addition to the mandatory employment career readiness standards. So in following the VAL Act, the department and all of the partners have implemented a program where you have core curriculum and core CRSs. You have career readiness standards that meet the employment requirements across the board. Everyone has to provide those career readiness standards. And if they choose another path, they have to provide those career readiness standards also. But it was the view of the task force, and of course, as imposed by the Vow to Hire Heroes Act, that everyone attend the DOL employment workshop. And we agreed with that. Everyone, whether they go into higher education, technical training, they all are going to need those skills to join the labor force.
Well, my time has expired. I'm going to recognize Ranking Member Takano for his questions.
Could you, for the Department of, for the Veterans Affairs Department, can you talk a little bit about your work-study program and its successes?
Thank you very much, Mr. Takano, Congressman Takano. Our work-study program is a pretty extensive program. The extension on this is just for those pieces that expire this year. We do a wide variety of other work-study type programs. For example, we do outreach programs, we do preparation and processing of paperwork at VA facilities, educational institutions, hospitals, medical treatment centers, and a number of those other things. Our future outreach efforts that we're working on now is we're developing a communication plan in conjunction with our state approving agencies and that association to help us put that together so we can issue good and updated guidance that will encourage that sort of outreach through the schools for our work-study program. We're also looking at enhancing our call center scripts for those students that are calling in. We're updating our portfolio of outreach products to include brochures, our websites on Vet Success, as well as our GI Bill website. We're also looking at displaying work-study products on our e-benefits website, and we're also on a routine basis promoting them through our social media channels, meaning Facebook and Twitter and some of those other things.
Great, thank you. Do you have any recommended changes for HR 357? I mean, I know that you're maybe a little cautious on what its effects might be, but do you have any thoughts on any changes that you would make?
I don't know that we have specific recommended changes, Congressman Takano. We're looking at it, and our caution is as we look at any proposed legislation or new program, we sort of box it into sort of two key elements, and one is do no harm to veterans, and what are we hoping to accomplish with doing this? As you know, and as Chairman Miller pointed out as well, the in-state tuition requirements vary across all 50 states and within schools. And one of our concerns is could or might or how would we help design a program that would not limit choices to our veterans, such that we could figure out a way for our veterans to have as many choices and informed choices as possible. I think perhaps the other issue that we would like to look into is currently it applies only to veterans. As we read the proposed legislation, it does not apply to spouses and dependents and some of the other beneficiaries. And so we'd need to understand that impact as well.
Help me understand the legislation. Does it still require students to meet the residency requirements, or is it just sort of waive residency requirements completely? Do you know?
I'm sorry.
Well, I'm just wondering if this law requires that veterans are able to access state education at state colleges. Are we mandating that they get the in-state tuition rates and not have to qualify for the residency at all, or are they?
It's my understanding, sir, and again, each state has its own residency requirements, and then of course each college has their own in-state tuition requirements as they relate to those residency requirements. It's my understanding that this bill would require that any school that does not agree to provide in-state tuition rates to veterans would not be eligible for GI Bill benefits or post-9/11 GI Bill benefits. Does that answer your question?
I'm just trying to figure out whether the residence requirements are just waived for the veterans, so that if they move into a state, they don't have to normally meet those requirements.
I would suggest that the legislation requires that the school waive the residency requirements such that they would be charged in-state tuition.
Okay.
I hope I answered that.
Yes, you did. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Takano. I will comment here that 357 does not define residency, so we're not interfering with any state law with respect to residency. It really just says that the schools will charge the in-state rate, so it doesn't mess with the definition of residency. With that, I'll now recognize Mr. Kaufman for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Coy, in your written statement, you failed to take a position on Section 2 of H.R. 1412, the on-the-job training bill, which required the VA to undertake a public relations campaign to promote the OJT apprenticeship program. How does the Veterans Administration or Department of Veterans Affairs currently promote this program?
Thank you. That's a very good question, sir. We promote the program through a number of different ways, many of them very similar to the kinds of things that I mentioned earlier for the work-study program. Interestingly enough, we're working through many of our SAAs to develop, increased awareness in the program. And so what we're doing is we're working with those national associations, NASA being the most prominent. We are working with the President and Vice President of NASA to help us formulate additional outreach campaigns and ways that we can streamline the OJT program, because we probably are not leveraging it to the extent that we should or might.
Yeah, I mean, when did you start this process? Because the participation rate has just been extraordinarily low in this program. So, I mean, are you just merely planning this process, or are you executing a plan at this point in time?
We started this process probably about 6 months ago and had those discussions with the SAAs. I've given talks at several of their conferences. With respect to OJT, last year we had about 2,500 people participate in the program, and the year before is about 5,600. So you're right, it has dipped down in the last year.
Mr. Ryan, in your written statement on H.R. 1412, again, the OJT bill, you said that you didn't need additional authority to encourage other federal agencies to use the program. How many federal agencies use the VA OJT program to help train new workers?
Yes, sir. There's sort of two parts to the question, or to my answer. The first part is right now we have agreements with 15 other federal agencies, and we'll be happy to provide you that list, for over 50 occupations on a national level. In other words, if there's a occupation in Department of Homeland Security, it applies to any of those occupations throughout the 50 states. What we don't have good information on are those local agreements that we have OJT agreements with. But I will tell you that we do have national agreements with 15 agencies for about 50 different occupations.
Okay, and can you, I understand you were going to supply some additional written materials to the committee on that. And could you state where the statutory authority is for you to do that? Because I don't read that in current law.
I'll have to take that for the record, sir, and we will get back to you on what that specific statutory requirement and or regulation that we're citing to be able to do that.
Very well. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Kaufman. Ms. Kirkpatrick, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My first question is for each member of the panel. Do you support making the additional specialized tracks mandatory? And let's start with you, Mr. Coy.
I think right now, as I stated in my written testimony, what we'd like to do now is assess where we are. We're currently running essentially 3 different TAPs because TAP is now mandatory for service members. So we're still doing, if you will, old TAP the way we did it in years past, so we can make sure that we're doing TAP for those individuals. We're rolling out the new TAP program, and we're piloting and building the TAP GPS program. So we're sort of riding these 3 bikes as we're going forward, and it I would suggest that probably what we'd like to do is be able to implement those programs before we have legislative requirements to do something additional.
Dr. Kelly?
I think what I would like to have happen is to give us time to roll out the redesigned program and to assess that. But I would also like to have that considered in light of our second phase and the end state for the Transition Assistance Program, and that is for this curriculum to be rolled out and implemented across the military life cycle, so that the issue of time becomes less important, and it is the outcome of the curriculum that the services and our partners have determined is most important for our service members to ensure that they are career ready. And we focus on the skills building as evidenced by them meeting the career readiness standards. I also would ask for the time consideration to be held back because we're also developing a virtual curriculum. And all of this curriculum is going to be provided virtually so that members can go to that website and go through the training on their own time, complete the activities on their own time, the deliverables on their own time, and do that over and over and over again as they want to. And so that all of the tracks via a virtual curriculum is available to everyone. But we need time to do that. We are right now engaged with all of our partners, taking the curriculum and modifying that into a virtual curriculum with specific standards and putting that on the Department of Defense's Joint Knowledge Online, so that military members will go to that website where they get their other military training and preparation for separation after their military careers is a part of that military life cycle. So I think what I would prefer is to give us time to make this entire curriculum, this entire TAP redesign, and the career readiness standards value added to all of our service members, and they can explore multiple tracks and the curriculum on their own time rather than mandating a specific track for each one of them.
So it sounds like you think that keeping flexibility in the system is better for your students than having a mandatory imposed track.
I agree. I would say that I support the VOW Act mandating the Department of Labor's employment workshop track, because whether they choose a higher education, technical training, whatever track that they choose, they are going to need the job search skills eventually to join the labor force. And those skills that the Department of Labor is building in their current employment workshop is very, very exciting and eye-opening for our service members right now at the locations where they are providing that new curriculum. It is exciting to watch those service members start to document their experiences, translating those military skills and experiences, practicing their elevator speeches, and actually having the opportunity on that third day to watch someone role play, interviewing with an employer and a service member, and then actually having to practice those interview skills. Very value added.
Thank
and
you,
that's
Dr.
what our
Kelly.
focus is, value added.
Thank you. I have about 10 seconds left. Secretary Kelly, just like to hear your answer.
Thank you, Congresswoman. The department appreciates the intent of this legislation a lot to get more education and skills, but we share the same concerns as my fellow colleagues do here today. We have just rolled this out on January of this year after several years of pilots and after a lot of times with the agencies and the services putting together the best minds and the experts to do that. So respectfully let's try this, walk before we run, see how this core program curriculum really works going forward. And as both the colleagues have alluded to, Dr. Kelly specifically said, the value of the core curriculum helps you if you want to be an entrepreneur. The value of the core curriculum really helps you if you want to go to school. There's a lot of self-assessment and things. So we're pretty excited about what is going on out here, and the reports have come back very positive on this new revised tab. Thank you.
Thank you, all of the panel, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your courtesy in allowing me to exceed my time.
Thank you, Ms. Kirkpatrick. Mr. Winstrup.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to go back a little bit further in the whole process of transition from being a member of the military to being enrolled in the VA. And perhaps that's a question for you, Mr. Pummel, is what is the process? How do you become aware of someone who has left military service and become part of the VA?
Right now, we will do it through the transition program. Prior to the transition program that we have in place right now, because of the VOW Act, it was if a service member went through their transition program and the VA provided them the information at a briefing. I believe the Marines had a mandatory program. The other services, it depended on your rank and your time in service and stuff. But so that there were some cases where we didn't find out about veterans.
Yeah. So you really are seeking, you would like to have their service record perhaps? Would that be helpful to you? The point I'm getting at is, it seems to me when I talk to veterans, and I am a veteran, that there is a wall, that when they leave the military, that there's a wall and they have to start over when it comes to transitioning into the Veterans Administration. Would anyone on the panel have any objection that if the DOD would automatically, electronically, rather than through snail mail, get their service record to you so you know who these people are so you can find them and get them engaged in the process? Would that be helpful?
That was one of the concerns of the VEI task force, and one of the focuses of the career readiness standards and the work of the task force to build those bridges between our service members to Veterans Affairs and to the Department of Labor. And one of the career readiness standards that are now in place is that our military members have to register into VA's e-benefits. So they are fully registered. They are VAs for life. After that, so they are registered in e-benefits. But the other piece is that capstone that I alluded to earlier, and the capstone will be where commanders, the representatives, verify the career readiness standards, and if there is a missed career readiness standard, there will be handoffs to both the Department of Labor and VA. So we have very much focused on building that bridge.
Because come to my attention that a lot of this is done through like snail mail rather than you automatically getting the service members' records, their skill sets. And would that, my question to you is, would that be a benefit that it would automatically transfer to you so that you know who your veterans are, what their skills are, and to get them more rapidly into a program that fits their needs and also find jobs for them that fit their skills? Anyone can take it.
Yes, Congressman. I think that, anything we can get is good. And we are working several projects with Department of Defense right now. One is this year we will start getting their service treatment records sent to the VA electronically. I believe the turn-on date is October of this year, so they'll be getting all of those electronically. We already get from several of the services now the DD-214s electronically, and I can't remember which service we're not getting it, but we're getting a download of an electronic download so we can see the discharge date and the information on the DD-214s. We're still working on trying to compile that data so that it is fully electronic transfer to the VA. We're also working with the Department of Defense on a task force for all their records, the 201 files, dental records, etc. The Army has a electronic 201 file, which we now have access to through the Department of Veterans Affairs. The goal in VBA, my boss, Secretary Hickey, is that she wants every record that she could get from the Department of Defense in electronic format, and we have teams and committees working on that right now. The only one that we have locked in is the service treatment record. which will also be certified as a full and complete record too, so we don't have to do additional searches and stuff like that. I think we're on track to get most of those, but I think it's a good idea.
Well, I think they can streamline things and very much help our troops through the transition process, and certainly I hope that we will be encouraging of that effort from this end. And I appreciate your approach of service member for life. As our troops enter the service, it shouldn't end when the day they take off that uniform. It continues on through you, and we should make that very smooth. And I yield back my time.
Thank you, Mr. Winstrup. Congresswoman Brownlee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just had one question regarding the transition situation. So I've heard from lots of veterans that, and I know the current program is trying to address this situation, but where vets are so anxious to get out that they're not really focused on the programs that are being offered, and then, 6 months down the road or a year down the road or whatever, they're concerned and the resources aren't there available. So I heard you mention virtual curriculum, and I would imagine that would address that one particular issue. I'm wondering if you have any other strategies to address that problem.
Well, one of the important strategies is within the Department of Labor, and that's at the American Job Centers, and I'll let Mr. Kelly speak to that.
Thank you, Congresswoman. To follow up on that, what we're really looking at are 4 touch points with that, because you are correct. When you're coming and processing out, you're ready to go home and not get slowed down on the way out. One of those touch points would be, we've estimated as best as possible about 70 days out to check in with those folks through the American Job Center network of 2,700 offices nationwide. How are things going? Are you in school? Do you have a job, or are there some issues that have now kind of, you've settled down, that perhaps we want to revisit that and plug them back into all of those services of the employment training services available out there to them. So we have reached it now, not just as they walk out the door, you got a job or not. Let's check back in up to 70 days to see how things are really going on that. That's one of the approaches using on that through, as I indicated, the 2,700 locations around the country.
But there's not any access for veterans who, a year down the road, are reconsidering what their future might look like, and rather than a virtual curriculum is good in one way, but really trying to determine what their future might be, where their desires are. Is there any way in which to interact to kind of discuss what their potential career paths can be?
Yeah, thank you, Congresswoman. I think you raised up a good point. The TAP program itself is really a lot of self-assessment of where do I really think I'm headed down life, and what are the things that are important to me. And that's mandatory to kind of do that first, flush those things out. Then, if it is for an individual who is sitting out here 6, 8 months, a year out, still not quite sure what they want to do ahead, and perhaps have decided not to do an entrepreneurial track or not to go to some advanced education, those American Service Centers are still there to give them priority as service. So they're available to them on an ongoing basis. It doesn't just end after 30 or 60 days. They're out there. The real estate is constantly out there to service those people.
And do all of our veterans know that service is available to them?
Thank you, Madam Chair, Congresswoman. I think that is a challenge. We are ramped up inside the Department of Labor to make sure we get the word out better, that is out there. That's a major outreach effort that we have undertaking, that it's out there. They will know that through the TAP process of processing out in the Capstone program. They will know that. Whether they can find that in 2 and 4 and 6 months of all of the things they process out, I don't know, but it will be provided to them ahead of time.
If I might add to that, one of the career readiness standards is the Gold Card from the Department of Labor that thoroughly explains to them there are job centers available to you, and you have priority status for 6 months after you separate and report to the American Job Centers. Again, that's part of that bridging.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Coy, it looked like you had a response. And
I was just going to add one other further comment, Congresswoman, and that would be the VA is also engaged in doing their own job fairs. We've done 3 rather large ones, and in those large job fairs, we bring those veterans in, we help them with resume writing, we connect them with employers who are there specifically to hire veterans. We are also partnering with the Chamber of Commerce's Hire Our Heroes efforts. They were doing well over 400 job fairs across the country, and we're partnering with them as well in many of those job fairs where we send VA representatives there to help them not only fill out their educational benefits or any of their other benefits, but to make sure that they understand that they're logged into the e-benefits system, but as well are aware of any educational or other benefits they may have coming to them.
Thank you. If there's no objection, we'll start a second round of questions. I think we had a few issues that were left unresolved. Mr. Pummel, one of the things you said a minute ago is that the DOD was going to begin the electronic records transfer to the VA. Now, is that a truly electronic interoperability, or is it just an electronic PDF?
It's for the service treatment record now. It's an electronic PDF. It just gives us the record in electronic format, so that we don't have to get it mailed, express mail or certified mail, whatever we're doing right now. And we make sure we get one for every single service member that leaves. But yes, it is still a PDF.
Okay. Well, it's a better step in the right direction. At least you take the mail out of the equation. But this not this subcommittee's jurisdiction, but what the whole committee is looking for is true electronic interoperability between DOD and VA. Dr. Kelly, what if we just merely added the education and entrepreneurship tracks to the current 5-day program that you talked about today?
I'm not sure I understand that. We have the core 5-day curriculum in place now. We're piloting the other tracks. So they are in addition to the 5-day core. The tracks for higher education, technical training, as well as entrepreneurship. I'm not quite sure.
Let me be a little bit more specific then. Maybe I was inelegant the way I asked it. What if we said that one of those has to be mandatory should a service member choose to take one of those? In other words, add a day or two to the program in order to be so that a young man or woman that desires to go to school or wants to open up their own business has that as part of their mandatory training.
I think there are lots of opportunities for us to look at the curriculum and how this might play out in the long term. And I'd like the opportunity to discuss that with you and all of the members. But I would be hesitant at this time to say what additionally should be mandatory. I'll leave it at that, but I would like to discuss some of those options.
Okay, I'm going to recognize Ranking Member Takano for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Kelly, actually, I think I'm on the Department of Labor. Mr. Kelly, Secretary Kelly, in your testimony, you state the initial implementation of VRAP was met by redirecting internal funds. How much was the cost of this initial implementation?
I believe here, thank you, Congressman, regarding extending the program, we estimate the support for national program activities of VRAP and the clause out from June 13 through September 2014 will cost around $273,000. And that's going to take some redirecting some money from somewhere else in the department to meet that going forward.
Okay. And how many reports is your department required to submit to Congress at this time on an annual basis?
Mr. Chairman, I don't have that information with you, but I'll certainly get it for the record.
Okay. And you wouldn't know of, obviously any report, since you don't have that number, but my next question was, were there any reports that you would recommend eliminating? So that if you don't know, you can also get that to me later as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Congressman Takano. I will get back with you on that with regards to our assessment from staff on those reports.
Okay. Let's see, the Department of Defense, I Mr. Chairman, those are my questions. I yield back.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Connell. Mr. Kaufman, any questions for you?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Coy, I stand corrected in terms of your statutory authority to do the program. What the bill does that I was referencing, House Resolution 1412, is that it requires you, because this program in terms of providing, allowing veterans to utilize their educational benefits for on-the-job training and apprenticeship programs, the fact that it's so poorly utilized, again, the bill requires you to do an informational program, doesn't give you the discretion. It merely says you shall do an informational program to raise the participation rate among veterans. And then secondly, obviously, the lowers the requirements for the employer in terms of salary, which I believe you support that. The Veterans Administration supports that provision. And then lastly, the third provision is not that you don't have the statutory authority to reach out to other federal agencies. It says that you shall reach out to other federal agencies and enter into agreements in order to expand participation, expand options for veterans in terms of employment and training. And so I just wanted to clarify that so that there's no requirement that I expressed to you. I expressed to you earlier, asked you to come back to the committee for your statutory authority, but that's not required in further reading of the bill. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Kaufman. Ms. Kirkpatrick.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have one question. This is a follow-up on Secretary Kelly's statement that the initial implementation would cost $273,000. My question is to you, Mr. Coy. What's the overall cost estimate for H.R. 1402, the Veteran Paralympic Act? That cost estimate.
Currently is $10 million. $2 million goes toward the athletes and many of their stipends, and then $8 million goes to the grant program.
Okay, thank you. I yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Kirkpatrick. Mr. Winstrup.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to parlay on what you brought up about the electronic transfer of records and how we're doing it, and I think that you can weigh in on this a little bit. Sometimes I think a PDF is the important way to go. What I've been made aware of is sadly, some of the prevalence of fraud when we've used snail mail, for example, to send someone their DD-214, and then they submit it to the VA, and they've made changes on that. You may want to address some of the prevalence of that, because I'm not really aware of the numbers, but just want to make the point that I agree with you that we should make it a more smooth transition of electronic records, but sometimes the PDF is important to cut down on the potential for fraud. And maybe, Mr. Plumlee, you could address that a little bit.
Okay. I don't have any figures on fraud. I'm not sure right now. But I do know that the PDF is good. And it's good that because the quicker we get the information, it is electronic information, and it's certified by the Department of Defense as accurate information, we can get services and benefits to service members faster and more accurately. And there is no mistakes. Sometimes we do get a lot of DD-214s right now that are hard to read or have been destroyed or mangled, things like this. This eliminates all that and makes it much easier for the veteran. More importantly, it gives a permanent record. So you don't have a situation where a veteran comes back 20 years from now and wants to submit a claim and we're not able to find the record because it didn't get mailed to the right place or he didn't get to keep a copy or something like that. The goal is to eliminate all of that. And the first step for us is we'll take the PDF, we'll take whatever we can get while they're working on the long-term interoperability of records and stuff like that. But we want electronic official files in every case that we can possibly get.
Thank you. I yield back.
Mr. Winstrup, thank you. Ms. Brownlee, no questions?
No further questions, thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you. If there are no further questions, the witnesses are excused with our thanks, and I would ask the second panel to come to the witness table. With us today are Mr. Charlie Hubner with the U.S. Olympic Committee. Next, Dr. Susan Aldrich with the American Association of State Colleges and Universities, followed by Colonel Michael Deming from the University of Kansas, who is testifying on behalf of the Association of Public and Land-Grant Universities. And finally, Finally, we have Lieutenant General Joseph F. Weber from my alma mater, Texas A&M University. Thank each of you for being here, and as soon as we're seated, we'll start with the testimony. Okay, thank each of you for joining us today, and we'll start with Mr. Hubner. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Good morning. Thank you, Chairman Flores, Member Takano, and members of the committee. My name is Charlie Hubner, and I'm with the United States Olympic Committee, and also a proud alum of Northern Arizona University. Member Kirkpatrick, thank you for your service in a beautiful area of the country. It's an incredible honor to have the opportunity to submit a statement and testify before this subcommittee in support of H.R. 1402, which extends the authorization for the highly successful, innovative, and cost-effective, and that's a word I'm going to emphasize significantly throughout my testimony, cost-effective partnership between the United States Olympic Committee and the Department of Veteran Affairs to provide Paralympic sports and sustainable physical activity opportunities for disabled veterans at the community level. Paralympic programs are sports for physically disabled athletes founded by veterans post-World War II. As a significant component of the rehab process, using physical activity, something that our service members and veterans understand very clearly, and also a little bit of competition. Research has proven that Paralympic sport and physical activity is an impactful aspect of successful rehabilitation for disabled veterans. Research-based outcomes from consistent physical activity for disabled veterans include higher self-esteem, lower stress levels, lower secondary medical conditions, and higher achievement levels in education and employment. At the beginning of combat operations, the U.S. Olympic Committee expanded its services at its own cost to injured service members and veterans by providing training, technical assistance, Paralympic ambassadors at installations, military medical centers, and in communities throughout the United States. As combat escalated, Congress reached out to the USOC asking us to do more. I applaud the leadership, especially of this committee and the leadership in Congress, which realized that collaboration between the public and private sector, between government agencies, nonprofit organizations, and private business could expand expertise and capabilities and program awareness in a cost-effective manner. Legislation that was implemented in 2010 allowed the USOC and the VA to significantly grow available program that today is reaching more than 16,000 veterans in communities all over the United States. The authorization for this program expires at the end of 2013, and it's imperative to continue to not only deliver programming, but more importantly, expand programming in communities where there's a great need is absolutely critical. Innovation, collaboration, and cost efficiencies are core to the USOC as an organization. It's critical to our success, and this partnership is a great example of that. Injured military personnel and veterans are the soul of the Paralympic movement. When discussing the Paralympic movement, we have two primary objectives. One, as Americans, we want to pursue excellence. And I passed out an article I just received about an hour ago from Goldman Sachs. I had the great fortune of being with Navy Lieutenant Brad Snyder last week in front of 500 Goldman Sachs partners on a Veteran Mentor Day. Brad was injured a year ago in Afghanistan. He is totally blind today. He used swimming as his rehab. He swam at the Naval Academy, and it was swimming that gave him confidence again and made his family realize that he could jump back into life. He went to London and won 3 medals for his country, but more importantly today he's going through that transition process, and sport has been a significant component of his rehab. Goldman Sachs hired 14 of the 15 mentors that are veterans last year, and they had 30 new mentors on the day that we were there with Brad Snyder. And that's a specific example of how important ambassadors are to what we do in this program. In terms of highlights, and I'll just focus on that, a core component of what the U.S. Olympic Committee is focused on are the more than 350 member organizations that we work with on a daily basis that touch every single community in this country. Since 2010, the VA and the USOC have distributed more than 350 grants to community organizations with an emphasis on developing sustainable physical activity programming, not just elite Paralympic sport. As one veteran said, an Army Ranger who lost both legs in Afghanistan, all he wanted to do was learn how to run with his son. Our emphasis is both elite sport, but the majority of our emphasis is daily physical activity for veterans to be physically active with their friends and families. Simply skiing again with your buddies in Colorado. More than 350 grants. Of those grants that we provided, the organizations we provided those grants are providing the majority of the funding to implement programming. That is a core message that I wanted to emphasize to this committee, is all the organizations we are working with are providing staffing and funding much more significantly than what the reauthorization is, and that's a critical component to the cost efficiencies. With that, I just wanted to thank the committee again for your leadership. Congressman Kaufman, a Marine, Ranking Member Takano, thank you for introducing the bill, and thank you for your support.
Thank you, Mr. Huebner. Dr. Aldridge, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Chairman Flores, Ranking Member Takano, and distinguished members of the committee, my name is Susan Aldridge. I'm currently a senior fellow at the American Association of State Colleges and Universities, commonly known as ASCU, and on whose behalf I appear before you this morning. Prior to ASCU, I served as president of the University of Maryland University College and formerly as vice chancellor at Troy University in Alabama. Both of these two state universities serve a large population of active duty service members and veterans. ASCU represents 420 state institutions and university systems across 49 states, the District of Columbia, Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Virgin Islands. And the common foundation for these institutions is their focus on students. Thank you for holding this hearing and for providing me with the opportunity to present testimony regarding H.R. 357, the GI Bill Tuition Fairness Act. H.R. 357 would require the Secretary of Veterans Affairs to deny GI Bill benefits to veterans who are not charged tuition rates equal to the in-state tuition rate. Moreover, this bill would not allow any veteran or their dependent enrolled at public institutions to receive GI Bill benefits if that institution does not offer in-state tuition to all veterans, thus cutting benefits to veterans in the future. The VA's testimony this morning highlighted a number of our concerns as well. ASCU supports the underlying promise of treating veterans as in-state residents and strongly supports the educational endeavors of our veterans. However, passage of H.R. 357 will potentially result in unintended consequences that I will address in more detail. Most public colleges and universities do not set their tuition policy. Currently, 10 states allow individual public institutions to set tuition policy. Post-secondary tuition policy in the remaining 40 states is set by state legislatures and by a statewide coordinating board. In addition, many states have a very clear set of criteria as to which students are allowed to be given in-state tuition benefits. This is further highlighted by a passage from the State Higher Education Executive Officer's February 2011 report, which says, and I quote, "States were asked to describe the process through which tuition levels are set. The variety of answers given underscores that there are as many processes for setting tuition as there are states. In many states, the process is a multi-step process involving many entities," unquote. Given the complexity of relying on 40 different state entities to change policies, it's quite likely that institutions will not have the ability to charge in-state rates even if they desired to do so. Veterans wanting to enroll in public institutions in those states would need to seek other costlier programs in order to utilize their GI Bill benefit by moving to another state that offered in-state tuition or attending a more expensive private not-for-profit or for-profit college. This creates a scenario of confusion since many veterans arrive on our campuses with the full expectation of receiving their GI Bill benefit. Non-residency occurs for many reasons and in many situations. If they're located in a state that is unable or has yet to alter residency treatment for veterans, significant disruption to the family unit can occur. A veteran would be forced to move to a state that offers in-state tuition in order to receive their benefits. Passage of this measure would create a hodgepodge map of eligible or ineligible states. It is also instructive for the committee to understand the nature of in-state versus out-of-state rates. One way of looking at an established out-of-state rate is to consider it as the full cost or close to full cost to the institution of educating a student. Since public institutions receive support from the state in order to provide its residents with an education, the in-state rate reflects the cost to the institution after factoring in the state subsidy. Thus, the in-state rate is supported by the state taxpayers. Passage of this bill would shift paying for the promise established under the GI Bill of supporting the education of a veteran from the federal government to the state specifically, and only for veterans attending public institutions. In the written testimony, ASCU offered several suggestions for improving the bill. In closing, ASCU institutions are serving our nation's veterans well. Institution after institution has established programs to provide quality service to the nation's military and veteran students. Passage of this bill would limit the exposure of quality support programs and the ability to pursue an education in a desirable field from an otherwise affordable public institution of higher education. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for the opportunity to speak today.
Thank you, Dr. Aldrich. Colonel Denning.
Chairman Flores, Ranking Member Takano, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for holding this hearing and the opportunity to testify before you on H.R. 357, the GI Bill Tuition Fairness Act of 2013. My name is Mike Denning, and I have the privilege of representing the University of Kansas, and also I serve as the Director for Graduate Military Programs. Prior to joining KU, I served 27 years in the Marine Corps, and I retired as a colonel. I am here today representing both the University of Kansas and the Association of Public and Land-Grant Universities, APLU. KU and the public university community overall appreciate the spirit of 357, H.R. 357, and I certainly do as a veteran. This nation's public universities, like KU, want to ensure that our nation's veterans are treated fairly and with the respect that they deserve. Public universities around the country are redoubling their efforts to address the needs of veterans and service members to whom we all owe an enormous debt of gratitude. I can also say that public universities were one of the most engaged groups with respect to successfully restoring the tuition assistance program during the Senate floor debate on the fiscal year 2013 Omnibus Continuing Resolution. While we are supportive of the overall intent and spirit of H.R. 357 to provide greater and more affordable access to higher education for veterans, we do have an array of concerns about the bill and believe that it may have unintended consequences of limiting or even denying veterans access to higher education institutions. Specifically, the bill requires all public universities to offer an in-state tuition to all veterans regardless of where they live. We are troubled that this legislation imposes a new unfunded mandate that would force states and/or public institutions to find additional resources to fully support the educational experiences of non-state veterans. States, not higher education institutions, set residency requirements. The state governments determine how best to use their state tax revenues. Since states are already facing budget crunches, many of them might simply be unable to afford to change their residency requirements to allow all veterans from across the country to receive in-state tuition. As currently written, H.R. 357 imposes the penalty of cutting off GI benefits to those states that cannot comply with the in-state residency requirement. We are greatly concerned that many states would be unable to meet the unfunded in-state tuition mandate, which potentially would lose veterans from losing their benefit of the GI Bill. For states that do adjust their residency requirements to provide lower in-state rates for all veterans, universities would be forced to make up the loss of out-of-state tuition. which could have a real impact on all students on campuses, and that they may be forced to cut services or programs to cover the lack of additional resources or even raise tuition rates across the board. This would impact all students, including veterans on the campus. Despite these aforementioned problems with the current form of the bill, we share your commitment to improving access for veterans to quality, affordable higher education. We hope to work with you to improve the effectiveness of the bill. In particular, we suggest that the state mandate and the penalty be removed and replaced with incentives and supplementary federal funds for states and institutions that broaden the scope of their in-state tuition rates for veterans. On behalf of the APLU and the University of Kansas, and from a veteran standpoint, I thank you for the honor and privilege of testifying before you and for your leadership on these issues. I look forward to any questions.
Thank you, Colonel Denny. General Weber, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Takano, and distinguished members of the committee, my name is Joe Weber, and I thank you for allowing me to be here today to address you. I currently serve as the Vice President for Student Affairs at Texas A&M University. Prior to that, I was privileged to serve our nation 36 years as a United States Marine. Before I get started, I just want to say this on the record. Our Congress and my Congress, it seems like every day comes under a lot of criticism about what they do and what they don't do. And I just want to go on the record to say that with respect to our veterans and our military, there is no criticism other than constructive and positive on what you've done for our military and our veterans, particularly the last 10 years. The benefits you provided, the resources to the force, the family programs for our families, the long drawn-out draining war, all of that, and it's more unbelievable when you look back and compare it to how our veterans were treated after Vietnam. So I commend you for that, and for that we always hold you in high honor and accord. Texas A&M University has a history and a tradition in support of the military and our veterans. It was started as a land-grant university in 1965. It was an all-military school, all-male military school up until 1963. Today it is now a flagship Tier 1 research university, member of the AAU, with servicing over 600 veteran students. Texas A&M University has not forgot where it's come from. Our state code of education in Texas is replete with programs, policies, verbiage, great generosity in assisting our active duty military, our veterans, in their pursuit of their higher education. We have a governor and a state legislature that it's very, very important to them that our two flagships and all our public universities take care of our veterans. And yes, we do have members in this very distinguished body up here who keep a close eye on us as well down there, as well as up here supporting our veterans. We're very appreciative for that. But today, Texas A&M University has over 50,000 students and serving the 600 veterans, but also 1,400 students associated in drawing some type of veteran benefit, be it state, institutional, or federal. The point I'm making is this particular piece of legislation has to be viewed as all veterans benefits, I think, as truly a federal, state, and institutional effort. We're all in this together. It's collaborative. Texas A&M University makes use of several programs of this collaborative effort in servicing our veterans. One is our Hazelwood Exemption Act, which basically provides 150 hours of tuition exemption for Texas residents and their spouse. It has since been extended to their spouses and children. It's been a very effective program. In 2007, we were serving 148 students. As of a month ago, we're servicing almost 1,400 students. The cost of that 148 students was about $680,000. We're now paying over $10 million, the institution is, to support this effort for our veterans and their families. We also have several students on the Yellow Ribbon program, which, as you know, is the co-share costs with the VA and the university, and assisting those students and paying for that tuition above and beyond the in-state.
We also have a military waiver program at Texas A&M. Basically, any veteran that comes to school at Texas A&M University and fills out this military waiver form with the intent of becoming a state resident or staying in that state after graduation or getting a degree from A&M, we provide them in-state tuition. Why do we do that? Well, I think the main reason we do that is we're trying to look out into the future. This is about recruiting. We want veterans, and if we can get veterans to come to Texas A&M University, get a degree, stay in our state, become successful leaders in their communities, successful businessmen, they will not only give back to our state financially and we'll make up that difference, but they'll also be great donors to our university. We have what's called a competitive scholarship program. Anyone that comes there gets a $1,000 scholarship competitively, qualifies for in-state tuition. Within our Texas code is a combat exemption. If you're a non-resident of Texas and your father or mother is deployed in a combat zone during the time of employment in that combat zone, you do not pay tuition. You're tuition exempt. So those various programs, in the bottom line, and I know I'm over time here, is we believe this is a good bill. It is a federal fairness issue, not just a state fairness issue. When these young men and women raise their hand to support and defend the Constitution of the United States, it's not the Constitution of the state of Texas. They're subject to be deployed any state in the country, any place in the world, and in harm's way. So we need to look at that. So we would ask you one thing, just look at the timing of the bill. State legislatures like Texas meet every 2 years. So however we have to work this, they need to have some time to sort it out. I know, Mr. Chairman, it's not a state residency matter, but some states, I think, view that, and we need to make sure it's clear of that too. So, but I appreciate the time with you, and thank you for all you've done for our veterans. Allow me to address you.
General Weber, thank you for your testimony. Thank all of you for your testimony. And I will start with the questions. I'll recognize myself for 5 minutes. Mr. Huebner, let's knock out a couple of what I think are easy ones first. So let's start with you. What effect has the new grant program had on your ability to raise funds from private sources?
The grant program has been significant in, one, getting more veterans involved, creating more awareness, which by expanding programming, creating more awareness, it's also helped us with generating new private resources. An example, a month from now, we will be hosting an event in collaboration, and I talked about that word in my testimony, and cost effectiveness, an event with the Department of Defense, Department of Veteran Affairs that was created by the U.S. Olympic Committee. That event is 2/3 to 70% privately funded. So I think it's an incredible example of, by expanding programming and properties, we're engaging not only we, the USOC, but our partners at the local level are engaging new private resources. And in my testimony, in my written testimony, there was a second example of a partnership where our partner at the local level is engaging new private resources that's primarily funding programming and making it sustainable. So it's not just new funding to the U.S. Olympic Committee, it's also to the funding to all those different programs that we're working with at the local level that are garnering new private investment to make this program incredibly cost effective, but more importantly, more impactful.
Thank you, Mr. Huebner. General Weber, thank you for your testimony today, and I wanted to compliment you on the work that Texas A&M is doing on behalf of our veterans, and I think it reflects what you and I both believe, and that is that our governor and the leadership and our state legislature in Texas get it right when it comes to recognizing the value of the service of our veterans to our country. And thank you for your recommendations on H.R. 357. I think those were particularly beneficial for the committee. And I don't have a question for you. Unfortunately, I just more of a compliment. This is for Dr. Aldrich and Colonel Denning. Let me talk. When you look at the Morrill Act and talk about land grant universities, the whole purpose of the land grant universities is to provide, and this is more for Colonel Denning, I guess, is to provide access. So doesn't H.R. 357 really promote the same thing? Isn't it sort of a great add-on to the Morrill Act to access to education in public universities, particularly land grants?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Sir, the again, the University of Kansas, APLU, absolutely appreciates the spirit and the intent of H.R. 357. And in this case, it's not, we didn't see it primarily as access. We saw it as affordability. How are we going to pay for this? And for those states that decide not to go along with the bill, it actually does, in our opinion, limit access because the state would opt out for it, and that would leave a veteran from making the decision of paying for it out of his own pocket or being unable to, or not being able to use GI benefits.
Well, let me, I mean, and I'm going to expand this to Dr. Aldrich as well as you, Colonel Denning. I mean, y'all have made it clear of your opposition to H.R. 357, but I mean, how do you explain your opposition to the students or prospective students that have, as General Weber said, held up their hand and swore an oath to our nation's Constitution, which covers all 50 states and not just to a particular state? How do you defend your position when these young men and women have agreed to defend all 50 states and not just a particular state?
Sir, from my standpoint, from the University of Kansas, is we actually do back everything you said by participating in the Yellow Ribbon Program, which has the exact same benefit or the intent and results of what H.R. 357 is, and that is to providing veterans access to the university at in-state rates. So basically, they can come to KU or any in-state or any university in the state of Kansas for no cost to them. That one of our requirements, or one of our recommendations to expand the Yellow Ribbon Program, which again would have the exact same effect of H.R. 357. The only difference would be by cost sharing with the VA.
Okay. Dr. Aldrich, any comments?
With my colleague, there are 109 ASCU institutions that participate in the Yellow Ribbon Program, are very pleased to participate in that program and serve these students. The ASCU institutions are good value for money in terms of their tuition rates and providing access to first-generation students, minority students, and veterans as well. The difficulty with the bill is that the public institutions are carved out, and the students, if they're not able to go to a public institution because of state legislation that dictates whether or not the tuition is allowed for out-of-state residents who are veterans, then the students are going to end up going to more expensive private for-profit institutions or more expensive private not-for-profit institutions. So I think the issue for us is that we'd like to level the playing field and simultaneously at least have the opportunity to work with state legislatures in a reasonable time frame. We're absolutely committed to serving these students and want to continue to do so.
Thank you, Dr. Aldrich. I now recognize Ranking Member Takano for 5 minutes.
Dr. Aldrich, do you know if 357 covers, H.R. 357 covers community colleges as well? Or is it only state colleges? Does this apply to community colleges?
I don't believe it does.
So it does not?
That's my understanding.
Because in California, I mean, I was a former community college trustee, and so if the community colleges don't offer in-state, or there's an in-state tuition rule with them, because we do have in-state versus out-state with community colleges as well. But this bill does not cover community colleges.
That's my understanding, but I would defer to the staff.
Okay, great, thank you. Can you tell me, Colonel, I've had the pleasure of actually being at your university for a summer with the NEH, the National Endowment for Humanities. Is there a disparity among the different states as far as in-state tuition, and how much is that? Or you may not know that. Dr. Aldrich may know that more about how the various states charge in-state tuition.
Sir, it's my understanding, Representative, it's my understanding that there are the different states do make different decisions. Some of the states, that those decisions on residency are made at the state level, either by the legislation or by a board, like the university, like Kansas with the Board of Regents. There are, as I understood from the testimony, there are 10 states that do set their own residency requirements at the university level.
Well, what I'm getting is that I know in California we subsidize community colleges to a great extent, and so what a student will pay in-state is significantly less than what a student will pay in New York, right? So the Californians are always kind of like, well, New York captures so much more federal aid, and those states that charge a lot more for community colleges will capture a lot more federal aid for those students who qualify for it. And so I'm trying to understand what the disparity is among the state colleges, the state subsidized colleges, because obviously the in-state rate is subsidized to a great extent. And so which states, you know, if you would know that sort of disparity, you know, how disparate is that?
Thank you, sir, for the question. There's tremendous disparity across all of the different states and the territories in terms of tuition rates and in terms of the amount of funding that the state legislatures provide to the institutions. And it's been changing every year, particularly in the last couple of years, which is why we have seen tuition increases. There's a direct correlation between the increase in tuitions and the decrease in legislative funding for state institutions. In some of our states, they have lost 50% or more of their state funding from the legislature over a period of 2 to 3 years. So the issue about tuition is one that we all must struggle with and work hard to try to contain for our students. But as the state budgets have had a difficult time, they have decreased the amount of funding for the...
But what I'm getting at is that for a state that has a small in-state tuition, a low in-state tuition because they subsidize it to a greater degree,
right?
Would they not suffer some sort of inequity here? Because it stands to reason that if, you know, we're funding that student to go to school,
yes,
or the veteran in this case, that state acts that really subsidizes their education, their college education to a greater degree. That state is actually kind of being shorted if you kind of compare it to a state that subsidizes it less. So I'm just trying to get a sense of what the disparity is between the states that subsidize a lot and the states that don't subsidize as much. Do you kind of, is there a number you have on the top of your head?
No, I don't have a specific
Okay.
number for that, but we certainly can do some research on that and get back with your staff on that.
Okay, great. That's it, Mr. Chairman. I have no more.
Thank you, Mr. Cano. Mr. Coffin, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Huebner, first of all, I think, could you restate, I think a lot of folks think that this reauthorization for the Paralympics or for veteran participation in the Paralympics is managed by your organization is just for the elite competitors. But I wonder if you could give us some examples about how you're able to take, you know, the average veteran that's been disabled and to be able to integrate them into some athletic events.
Yes, thank you, sir. Thanks for your service, too. You know, our focus, as I mentioned, we have two objectives. One is the elite level, and one of the benefits of having veterans participate at the elite level in 2012, and it goes back to a little bit of your question about investment. 5 of our partner organizations ran national television ad campaigns, more than $40 million in value, focused on veterans and focused on successful veterans that are contributing back to their country. So that is an important part, because having veterans as incredible ambassadors that are at the elite level allow us to create education, awareness, and excitement at the grassroots level for those families, and we live this every day, those families, and Brad talked about this last week. He came home to his family and he was totally blind, and it was swimming that gave him confidence, but more importantly, he said it was swimming that gave his mother confidence that he could jump back into life. And we use the elite platform to grow the grassroots platform, and our role specifically in this, the USOC was asked by you and by veteran and military organizations to lead this, because we have humbly, arguably the most inspiring brand in the United States. But we have expertise in sport, more than 50 different sports, as well as expertise in physical disability. So we're utilizing in this collaboration, in this partnership, our technical assistance, our support, and our member organizations to train local organizations, whether it's a Parks and Rec agency, 14 of them in Colorado, in your state, have been trained by us on how to implement a program for a person with a physical disability. Instead of going and developing a brand new program that would be incredibly costly, we're taking existing programs, Parks and Recs, USA Hockey, other entities, and teaching them how to implement or integrate a veteran with a physical disability into their programs so they can participate in physical activity with their family and friends.
Okay. Can you also speak to the GAO's recommendations on the Paralympic program as it applies to USOC?
Yes, actually, in coming out with this program, we emphasized to this committee, we emphasized to the VA, and we emphasized to the programs. Our highest priority in 2010 was meeting the need of programs. There were thousands of veterans returning home that needed physical activity. The GAO report focused on more oversight, and we were working on doing that at the time, and we've implemented all the recommendations in the GAO report. We have a couple of examples of that. Is we're doing, the USOC is doing independent audits of all of our grantees. We have a monitoring plan in place with the VA. We have weekly grant and monitoring calls. So we've aggressively implemented all the recommendations. But as we stated to them and to you, in 2010 and 11, our primary emphasis was programming. There was a great need for thousands of veterans returned home, and rolling this program out, that's where we really emphasized our focus.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Huebner. Thank you so much for all you do with the USOC and for veterans in the Paralympic program, and I'm certainly excited about pushing this legislation forward for the reauthorization of the program, H.R. 1402. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Kaufman. Ms. Brownlee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I too had a question for Mr. Huebner, and maybe you can't answer the question, I don't know, but I was just wondering if there has been any study at all to sort of look at the cost-benefit ratios in terms of the disabled vet participating in this program. You mentioned all of the benefits one receives, including their own personal health, and just wondering if there's been any study vis-a-vis the cost savings, into the future for participating in the program today and the cost benefit for the future.
It's an incredible question, and I'll be honest, we are having discussions with the VA about that as we speak, because in our initial grant we have some research components and impact components and evaluation components in the grant. There are so many studies that are out there by many government organizations, some of which talk today, labor, VA, DOD, independent organizations. So the conversation we're having right now is, do we need to use resources in this grant to go do another study, because there are numerous studies out there, and ma'am, after this session I can provide you a study that we were involved in that talks about the impact, and primarily the most significant impact is lower secondary medical conditions in terms of having physically active, involved, disabled veterans in their communities. That's probably the most significant cost impact. No doubt there's numerous other things when you add higher self-esteem and lower stress levels in terms of what we're dealing with today. Those are positive outcomes. Higher education, higher employment achievement levels, no doubt cost outcomes. But we are looking at that right now, because in reviewing this and reviewing with the director, who's a veteran and a disabled veteran of the VA program, we're determining, do we need to spend more money on more research, being that there's, Google it today, and there's multiple factors of research going on in this space. Our position tentatively is that we think we can develop more programming to impact the research that's being done by so many other entities, but we do have some initial components and research that we can provide for you after this hearing.
Thank you. And just in terms of developing, I think what you called the grassroots platform, can you give me some idea of the, the larger population of disabled vets and how many actually participate?
Yeah, the majority, and I was going to add to your first question with a specific example. The majority of the disabled veterans, the more than 16,000 that we've touched just in the program, and when I say we, I want to emphasize this isn't just the U.S. Olympic Committee, it's the USOC, the VA, the DOD, but more importantly, it's those 50 member organizations like Parks and Recreation and USA Hockey that touch every community. We're doing this in collaboration with them, and they're bringing their own staff, their own resources to the table. So one specific example of a program that not only implements cost, but also touches the number of veterans participating. We were fortunate to have a disabled veteran attend our national leadership training where we teach people how to do it. He also attended a regional training where he learned how to implement a Paralympic sport program. He implemented in Harker Heights, Texas, right outside one of the largest military installations in the country with a huge veteran population, a physical activity program that's now sustainable. We provided a $23,000 grant in this partnership. $23,000 doesn't create a program. Harker Heights, Texas, Parks and Rec raised the additional money, used some of their own budget, and hired a veteran to run the program. They now have a sustainable program, which 95% of the budget is being funded by the local community. But the majority of the people, I think the last number was more than 800 veterans participating in that program. There's not one person in that program that's on our Paralympic team or going to the Paralympic Games. That's just one specific example in one community. That's happening all over the United States, where the majority of the people participating, our primary focus, gets back to that Army Ranger. I want to be able to run with my son.
Thank you. And one last question. I don't have much time left, but I wanted to also compliment General Weber also for what Texas A&M is doing for your veterans in Texas. The chair is an alumni, so, he's going to compliment you, but I'm not, and I want to compliment you on what you're doing. It's very, very impressive, and I think you serve as a model for many other public universities across the country. You said that you're currently serving 600, I think, veteran students and 1,400 students who are getting some kind of veteran benefits, and a student population of 50,000. So I'm just wondering if you roughly have, there's been testimony about, the unfunded mandate, the transfer of burdens to the states in terms of costs, if you had any estimations of what that looks like for your university.
Well, first let me begin by saying A&M is extremely blessed. We are in a state that the economic conditions are much better than others. We have a large population of students, and we probably can bear unfunded mandates much better than some of our perhaps smaller public universities who may have proportionally more veterans than we have. So I think that would be another comment to when you write the bill, to make sure, if any wording you can, to provide incentives or flexibility to all public institutions to handle that. So I first must say up front that we can probably position to handle it better. Now presidents of universities are pressured from the state legislatures, the Board of Regents. Their budgets are being cut. Ours was cut $36 million over the last biennial appropriation. A lot of pressure on them to reduce costs. Parents, reduce costs of college. So in order to do that, they're thinking, how do I generate revenue, not what programs do I have to give up revenue. And so I just think that's one of the issues right there that they're having to deal with. But Texas A&M University has a $1.3 billion budget. Cannot we find $10 million to allocate to our veterans? And when the economy is tough and everybody has to tighten their belts, it's good in the sense that it forces us to prioritize and reallocate. And so that's how we're handling a lot of ours right now. But we're very conscientious. We don't want to take another $36 million cut because that could really put the pressure on the reallocation in the prioritization.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the additional time. I appreciate
Thank you. It depends on the institution. Sometimes I can be gracious. So. In any event, with the ranking member and I have discussed, we're going to have a second round of questions, and with unanimous consent, we're going to limit the questions and answers to 2.5 minutes for each of these, and I will begin the second round. Dr. Aldrich and Colonel Denning, again, thank you for being here and thank you for your testimony. But let's talk some real numbers. The VA has estimated that only 15% of the students that attend 15% of the veterans that are attending universities, or excuse me, 15% of the universities have over 100 veterans. So what sort of financial impact are we talking about for that 15%? It seems like 85% just have a small handful of veterans, 100 or less. So what's the impact on that 15% that has more than 100?
I'll give you an exact number for institution by institution, but the difficulty with the policy is that it would disallow students from participating in the programs, whether they're in state or out of state, at a certain point in time, and we wouldn't want to see that happen. The issue in terms of the financial impact will be institution by institution. I think the broader issue is the timeline for the implementation and the need for state legislation or state boards of regents to make decisions in order to consider this. The other issue is that the language penalizes state institutions, but at the same time doesn't address the fact that private nonprofit universities and private for-profit universities that usually charge significantly more than the state institutions are not even addressed in this bill.
Okay, thank you. I'm going, Colonel Denning.
Representative Flores, thank you, sir. I really don't have anything to add to that.
Okay, thank you. Ranking Member Takano, you're recognized for 2.5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I don't have any further questions. I yield back my time.
Okay. I want to thank the panel for your testimony today. It has been very helpful as we consider these important pieces of legislation, and it's hard to imagine Mr. Huebner getting any more excited about our programs. With that, this panel is excused, and while we're changing panels, we're going to take a short biological recess as the next panel is being seated. The hearing will come back to order. I want to thank the members for the last round of questions, and I would like now introduce our final panel. First, we have Mr. Alexander Nicholson from the Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America. Today is Mr. Nicholson's first time testifying before the committee, so congratulations and welcome. Next, we have Mr. Ryan Gallucci from the Veterans of Foreign Wars, followed by Mr. Steve Gonzalez with the American Legion. Finally, we have Mr. Michael Dakduk from the Student Veterans of America. Mr. Nicholson, let's start with you, and you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Flores, Ranking Member Takano, distinguished members of the subcommittee. On behalf of Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America, or IAVA, I'd like to thank you for this invitation to share our organization's views on these bills and for your continued dedication to improving the lives of all of America's veterans. IAVA is the nation's first and largest nonprofit, nonpartisan organization for the veterans of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Founded in 2004, our mission is simple: to improve the lives of Iraq and Afghanistan veterans and their families. With a growing base of over 200,000 members and supporters, we strive to create a society that honors and supports veterans of all generations. While our country's economic position and the employment status of all Americans remains a grave concern for everyone, it should distress each and every one of us that America's newest veterans, those who have shouldered the burden of fighting our recent wars, are being hit the hardest. In its most recent release on the employment status of veterans, the Bureau of Labor Statistics revealed that nearly 1 out of every 10 post-9/11 veterans is unemployed. And although we are focused here today on legislation to enhance opportunities for veterans who are able to work, I would be remiss if I did not remind the committee members that those who cannot seek work because of a service-connected disability continue to face an unacceptably backlogged VA claims pipeline, which denies veterans who cannot work the compensation they deserve to make up for their loss of earnings. But for those veterans who are able to work and who want nothing more than to be able to transition back into civilian life, get an education, find gainful employment, and build a better life for themselves and their families, we owe it to them to ensure that they have the tools, resources, and knowledge to successfully take those next steps. As a result, IAVA is supportive of all of the legislation that is the subject of this hearing today. For 3 of these bills in particular, I would like to elaborate on why we believe they are important. First, H.R. 631, which would enhance, expand, and standardize the content of the Transition Assistance Program, constitutes a positive step in the right direction toward equipping troops with the knowledge and skills they need to be successful as new veterans. A comprehensive, substantive, and consistent transition assistance program is vital to ensuring service members' smooth transition back into civilian life and to ensuring the stability and security of their families. Second, the draft bill that would increase the availability of on-the-job training and apprenticeship programs for veterans represents an important step, represents an important acknowledgement of the enormous benefit that can come from practical learning and training experiences. Sometimes, and in some fields, there is simply no better way to learn a job or trade than to actually dive in and get hands-on experience in that field. And finally, for those who elect to return to school after completing their military service obligations, it is obvious that the post-9/11 GI Bill has been a tremendous boon for veterans of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. But the need for various adjustments and fixes to the program has also become obvious. H.R. 357 would fix another benefit utilization issue by allowing veterans to attend public universities at their respective in-state rates and actually be able to afford to go to school and live comfortably using their post-9/11 GI Bill benefits. Because of the nature of military service, service members are required to move around according to the needs of the force. Service members who are stationed at a particular post or base may live in that state for years, may buy a home in that state, shop and pay local taxes in that state, raise a family in that state, and generally become part of a community in that locale. However, that service member may still not always technically be considered a resident of that state for tuition purposes. The situation is not just hypothetical for IAVA members, but rather reflects a real situation that many veterans of Iraq and Afghanistan have found themselves in after leaving military service. Veterans who wind up living in an area outside of their home states through no fault of their own should not be denied the opportunity to use their earned education benefits to cover the full cost of education in an area where they are already functional, if not technical, residents simply because of their military service. This bill would remedy that gap in tuition and residency fairness and ensure that all veterans can take advantage of the promise of the new GI Bill without undue hardship. We again appreciate the opportunity to offer our views on these bills, and we look forward to continuing to work with you, with your staff, and with the committee to improve the lives of veterans and their families. Thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you, Mr. Nicholson. Ms. Gallucci, you're recognized. Mr. Gallucci, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Flores. On behalf of nearly 2 million members of the VFW and our auxiliaries, I want to thank you for the opportunity to present VFW's stance on today's pending legislation. Unemployment among young veterans who served after 9/11 continues to outpace unemployment among civilians, which is why the VFW, the nation's largest organization of combat veterans, continues to champion veterans hiring and legislative initiatives. I want to thank this subcommittee for its hard work in the last Congress passing laws like the Vow to Hire Heroes Act and Improving Transparency in Education for Veterans Act and other initiatives that have helped make today's veterans more competitive in tough economic times. However, with the wars drawing down, proposed reductions in the active duty force, and plans to lean on the Guard and Reserve for future missions, we must do more. The VFW proudly supports each bill up for discussion today, and I refer the subcommittee to my prepared statement for VFW's full analysis. For the balance of my remarks, I want to offer our thoughts on 3 critical bills, H.R. 357, H.R. 562, and H.R. 631. As of 2011, Student Veterans of America reports that only 1 out of every 5 veterans attending a public school is eligible to attend at the in-state rate. Why? Because military service precludes many veterans from satisfying residency requirements for tuition purposes. The VFW regularly hears from student veterans who say that financial uncertainty is the most significant roadblock to finishing school. To combat this, it only makes sense to allow our student veterans to attend college at a reasonable rate when seeking to use their earned post-9/11 GI Bill benefits, and we hope the committee moves quickly to pass the GI Bill Tuition Fairness Act of 2013. The post-9/11 GI Bill was intended to offer veterans a free public education and a modest living stipend, allowing veterans to treat college as a full-time job without worrying about financial stability. However, current law only allows VA to reimburse veterans attending public schools for the cost of an in-state education, meaning veterans who cannot qualify for in-state tuition will only receive meager reimbursement for college. This oversight forces veterans to find other ways to pay for college by tapping into other federal aid programs, finding full-time employment, or amassing student loan debt even when they make a good faith effort to legally reside in a state and attend a public school. An easy solution to this issue is for public colleges and universities to allow post-9/11 GI Bill veterans to attend at the in-state rate. Service members already have similar protections when using military tuition assistance at public schools, with minimal impact on the ability of state colleges to deliver a quality, reasonable priced education. Unfortunately, once the uniform comes off, veterans suddenly become stateless for tuition purposes. The post-9/11 GI Bill is a federal program designed to help our heroes acquire the skills necessary to build a successful career after service. Our veterans serve the nation, not a particular state. They should not be penalized for that service when they cannot satisfy strict residency requirements for tuition purposes. States know that they can deliver a quality education at the in-state rate, particularly for such a small percentage of the student body. This is why 10 states already offer in-state tuition for veterans, 8 offer conditional waivers, and 16 others are considering legislation. In states that offer in-state tuition, both Republican and Democrat state leaders all agree that the financial benefits for the state far outweigh the illusory financial burdens that some in higher education believe would be detrimental to institutional budgets. Simply put, graduates of public colleges and universities traditionally pursue careers close to their alma mater, and I'll refer you to my prepared statement for quotes from some of the state leaders who support these. Next, on the VRAP Extension Act. The VRAP was proud to support the establishment of VRAP as part of the Vow to Hire Heroes Act. Unfortunately, enrollment is down, and the program is set to expire before many veterans can fully use it. VFW fully supports extending VRAP and reporting outcomes, but we also ask the committee to consider 2 improvements to the program. First, Congress should ease the restriction on institutional eligibility. The VFW understands why VRAP only pays for programs no longer than 2 years in duration, but as a result, 4-year schools cannot participate. Unfortunately, some communities only offer 4-year schools. An example, in Erie, Pennsylvania, veterans will not find an eligible community college nearby because the Penn State Erie campus serves as a de facto community college. Second, Congress must make it easier for VRAP to cover remediation. Recently, the VFW heard from the Student Veterans Organization at Community College of Rhode Island, who report that basic remedial skills like math, composition, or computer literacy cannot be covered through VRAP since they do not correlate to an approved program. The VFW believes that veterans must be able to easily use VRAP for remediation, otherwise veterans will not be able to complete their programs. And finally, on the Service Members Choice and Transition Act, the VFW fully supports TAP redesign, and we thank VA, Labor, SBA, and DoD for allowing us to evaluate their pilots. That being said, the VFW believes that TAP has significantly improved, but we have lingering concerns. The VFW supports DoD's efforts to build a military life cycle for professional development, but we prefer the transition model set forth in H.R. 631, which compresses TAP and allows service members to actively choose their unique transition plan. This model acknowledges the finite time frame services can dedicate to delivering TAP. Chairman Flores, this concludes my statement, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Palucci. Mr. Gonzalez.
Our service members and women returning from Iraq and Afghanistan, as well as those from previous eras, are met with daunting challenges at home. Chairman Flores, Ranking Member Tatanko, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, on behalf of Commander Couts and the 2.4 million members of the American Legion, I thank you and your colleagues for the work you do in support of our service members and veterans as well as their families. We are pleased to see that the pending legislation before us today addresses these challenges in productive ways. As the largest organization of wartime veterans, the Legion works tirelessly to make a positive difference in the lives of our nation's active duty troops, reserve, and guard forces, and 22 million veterans and their families. We are looking forward to working with you to ensure that the best benefits and services are made available to them. We have addressed each of the pending bills in our written statement, but because of its importance, I would like to take this opportunity to highlight just one of them now, specifically H.R. 357, GI Bill Tuition Fairness Act. The American Legion is synonymous with veterans' education, being instrumental in the passage of both the original GI Bill of Rights of 1944 and the most recent post-9/11 GI Bill, along with helping the modern-day veteran navigate the confusing world of education benefits. The main reason for the post-9/11 GI Bill was that VA education benefits were no longer covering fast-rising tuition costs. Working with Congress, we stressed the need for a 21st century GI Bill that would provide benefits worthy of our veterans and offer the same opportunities afforded to those who fought in World War II. However, over the last couple of years, we have heard from countless veterans who, because of the nature of military service, often have a difficult time establishing residency for the purpose of obtaining in-state tuition rates. Under current rules, 40,000 student veterans have to pay the difference between in-state tuition, which is covered by the post-9/11 GI Bill, and out-of-state tuition if they are attending school as a non-resident. Because of this, many of our student veterans are unable to use their GI Bill benefits at a school of their choice, or are required to pay thousands of dollars in out-of-pocket expenses and non-residential tuition rates. Furthermore, public schools, public colleges, and universities have significantly raised the cost of out-of-state tuition to offset decreasing revenues due to state budget cuts. Circumstances such as this pose significant challenges to using this important benefit. To address this, the American Legion has led a state-by-state initiative to introduce, advocate for, and support state legislation that will fix this problem, and we have seen recent victories in Indiana, Maryland, Missouri, and North Dakota. As a result, 10 states have passed laws to waive the residency requirement. Another 9 states have waived these for some veterans and military family members through university-specific policy changes. However, this leaves too many veterans in states which have not done so. Unfortunately, though, not all states or schools seem to recognize by their actions the necessity of fixing this problem. We were therefore pleased to see Chairman Miller and Ranking Member Michaud jointly introduce H.R. 357, bipartisan legislation which would solve this problem by requiring public colleges and universities as a condition for receiving GI Bill funding to give veterans in-state tuition rates. Chairman Miller was absolutely right when he said in a statement upon the bill's introduction that, and I quote, "The men and women who serve this nation did not just defend the citizens of their home states, but the citizens of all 50 states. As such, the educational benefits they receive from the taxpayers should reflect that," end quote. Veterans shouldn't have to assume tremendous financial burdens or go into deep debt for their education just because the military has taken them away from their home state. Again, the whole point of the post 9/11 GI Bill was to ensure student veterans attending public schools receive a reasonably priced education at the public school of their choice. Therefore, this legislation is absolutely essential to the thousands of veterans who were promised this funding for their college education when the post 9/11 GI Bill was originally passed, and is vital to giving veterans an equal opportunity to afford the school of their choice. The American Legion pledges to put our full weight behind this important legislation and encourages this committee to aggressively pursue timely enactment. In conclusion, I appreciate the opportunity to present the American Legion's views regarding this legislation and believe we are uniquely qualified to participate in this discussion. I am looking forward to your questions, and thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Gonzalez. Mr. Dykduk, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Flores and Ranking Member Takano, who's not here, and the other members of the subcommittee. Thank you for inviting Student Veterans of America to testify on important legislation impacting current student veterans and future student veterans that will undoubtedly take advantage of generous VA education benefits like the post 9/11 GI Bill. The Student Veterans of America, or SVA, is the largest and only national association of military veterans in higher education. Our mission is to provide military veterans with the resources, support, and advocacy needed to succeed in higher education and after graduation. We currently have over 800 chapters or student veteran organizations at colleges and universities in all 50 states, including a dozen or more in your home state of Texas, that assist veterans in their transition onto the college campus and ultimately into meaningful employment. Our network all across this country of veterans and military family members organized at community colleges, four-year institutions, public, private, nonprofit, and for-profit schools provides Student Veterans of America with a special appreciation for the issues affecting military veterans in higher education. Regarding the pending legislation being heard today, I planned on briefly covering two bills and using the remaining time to focus on H.R. 357, the GI Bill Tuition Fairness Act, but given other testimony you've heard today, I'm going to focus my remaining time on H.R. 357 exclusively. The post 9/11 GI Bill pays the highest in-state tuition and fees rate. Due to military obligations, many veterans are unable to establish in-state residency for the purposes of enrolling at a public university or college. Ultimately, this becomes a financial burden that leaves veterans vying for additional financial aid due to out-of-state residency status. After conducting a state-by-state landscape analysis using all 50 state legislators' bill search engine and the National Conference of State Legislators databases, we have discovered the following regarding in-state tuition residency waivers for student veterans. 12 states passed legislation that waived the in-state tuition residency requirements for all veterans. 3 states waived the in-state tuition residency requirement for some veterans, including your home state of Texas, which was referenced the Hazelwood Act in previous testimony. But it's important to understand that the Hazelwood Act is unique, that you have to have already been a resident of Texas, graduated from a Texas high school. Now, there are other special provisions in there. 5 state school systems passed policy that waives the in-state tuition residency requirement for veterans. For example, the state of Alaska. While the state legislature has not done anything in the state of Alaska, the public university system of Alaska has granted in-state tuition for all veterans. 16 state legislators are currently considering laws that would waive the residency requirements for veterans to receive in-state tuition. But it's important to note that the climb into double digits of state legislators looking at in-state tuition for veterans has much to do with the American Legion's-led state-by-state grassroots effort and our work, Student Veterans of America, American Legion, and the Veterans of Foreign Wars, on raising the profile on this issue. Prior to coming here and before the start of the 113th Congress, there was only roughly 6 states considering in-state tuition for veterans. So I think it's incredibly important to acknowledge my colleagues at the American Legion and the VFW. Sadly, now 14 states have not even broached the topic of providing in-state tuition for veterans, including my home state of Nevada. That's why I appreciate that Congresswoman Titus has offered her name as a co-sponsor for H.R. 357. Another interesting thing, it's troubling that we as a country find no cost too great to send America's sons and daughters off to war. Yet when they return home and remove the uniform, some entities and national associations and institutions search for reasons not to give them the full support that they have earned. Another interesting thing is that in the Higher Education Act, there is a clause that provides in-state tuition for all active duty service members and spouses. Once again, when we remove our uniform, we begin to raise issues on why we cannot support military veterans that are student veterans currently using GI Bill or other VA educational benefits. In closing, I appreciate the opportunity to provide the subcommittee with SVA's views, and we look forward to answering your questions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Dykduk, and I appreciate the testimony of all of you. I appreciate each of your respective service for our country, and I appreciate the support of our veterans that each of your organizations provide. I will begin the questioning, and I'll recognize myself for as much time as I may need. First, for this question would go to all of you. I would ask you to keep your individual answers as short as you can. This has to do with H.R. 357. You heard some testimony by the last panel, particularly by Dr. Aldrich and by Colonel Denning in opposition to H.R. 357. What's your reaction to that? And we'll just, if you don't mind, we'll start with Mr. Nicholson and go to your left.
Sure. Just to keep it brief, Mr. Chairman, I would just reiterate the remarks actually of Chairman Miller at the beginning of this hearing. That, you know, number one, they keep saying that it's an unfunded mandate when it is not. I would just basically offer a reiteration of what Chairman Miller offered in response to their opposition at the beginning.
Okay, Mr. Gallucci.
Thank you, Chairman Flores. I think there's something interesting at play here when we hear some of the comments that we heard from the previous panel. Now, in the last Congress, it took a very concerted effort by the Veterans of Foreign Wars, the American Legion, and Student Veterans of America to pass responsible consumer education reforms for our veterans. It was the right thing to do, and we were willing to speak to any stakeholder in higher education to make sure that we got that done. We echo that sentiment in this Congress, and we're willing to come to the table to discuss issues like in-state tuition with various stakeholders. But it's disconcerting to see that these stakeholders come to the table believing that first this is an unfunded mandate and that this is a burden on taxpayers. We've seen in a number of budget battles that this Congress is going through that our taxpayers believe in supporting our veterans, that it's the right thing to do, that we have an ethical obligation to support them. We represent taxpayers. Our constituents are all across the country in all 50 states, the VFW, American Legion, Student Veterans of America. The taxpayers are willing to do this. We've seen it from Republican and Democratic leaders in the states. We owe it to our veterans that since they cannot satisfy the residency requirements, we need to offer them in-state tuition.
Mr. Gonzalez.
Sir, one other thing I would address, and I guess I would add on to what Mike said about there is a precedence. The precedence is with the Higher Education Opportunity Act that was passed in 2008, Section 135, which actually indicates if any service member whose domicile does not reside within the state that they're actually sent to be for duty, and they're there for 30 consecutive days, they themselves, including the dependents and spouse, will be granted in-state tuition within the state that they're stationed for more than 30 days consecutively. So there is a precedence that it's already been implemented and put into play as of 4 or 5 years ago. So to say there's not a precedence is actually blatantly lie. And the other part I would address is for all the universities that say they want veterans, they're willing to help veterans, and I honestly say this, and we've learned this as of 48 hours ago, within the state of Maryland, we actually had a fight. The American Legion, working with our two other colleagues and organizations, had to fight against the university system of Maryland within the state of Maryland to pass a state waiver of residency for veterans within the state of Maryland, working with the governor's office and state legislators. But to see this blatantly fight behind closed doors where they say we want to bring in more veterans, we want to help veterans, but behind closed doors they're the first ones to say, we don't want to grant this because it's going to hurt our budget. It's not just economically detriment to our country, but it's also not sound policy by no means, Chairman.
Mr. Dykduk.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not going to repeat what any of the other folks said here, especially my colleagues from the VFW and American Legion, but you may have heard in the previous testimony the Yellow Ribbon Program. A lot of folks can sign up for the Yellow Ribbon Program. Schools do that. Here's something where I don't think you should be fooled on this. If you run a school and you sign up for the Yellow Ribbon Program, you might be perceived to be veteran-friendly because you signed up for it. But let's say the difference between out-of-state and in-state tuition is $10,000, and your school signed up for the Yellow Ribbon Program for $1,000, and then the VA matches it for $1,000, it's $2,000. That difference still ends up being $8,000. So they can say they're a Yellow Ribbon school, and they're supporting veterans, and they're veteran-friendly. But at the end of the day, if they don't fully support the Yellow Ribbon program, which many institutions of higher learning do not, and make a claim that they're veteran friendly, that's not fully supporting the student veteran at the end of the day. So that's one thing I want to clarify. Another thing is that over the past couple of years, there's been a lot of issues about for-profit schools looking at veterans as dollar signs. I have traveled over half the country, 26 states. I've met with hundreds of university presidents, CEOs, and most importantly, student veterans. It's interestingly enough, I have always said we need to stop talking about one sector and talk about higher education as a whole when we support military veterans. And now we have an instance where public universities, nonprofit, private and public, are looking at veterans as dollar signs as well with in-state tuition and not providing that with them. So I think that it's very interesting over the last couple of years how the focus has been on the for-profits, and I've always maintained that we need to look across the spectrum of higher education.
Thank you, Mr. Dakduk. Let's shift gears for a minute and talk about H.R. 631, the bill to improve TAPS. Can each of you tell me a little bit about what you think? I mean, if a service member is getting ready to further their education, and this education could cost up to the cost of taxpayers $250,000 to $270,000, as you saw in the example we put on the screen. Don't you believe that, or do you believe that it's important to give that service member a thorough understanding of their benefits on the educational track, so that they make the best use of these precious taxpayer dollars? And again, we'll start with Mr. Nichols and go the other way. If you don't have a response, you can just pass, and we'll go to the next one. So.
Chairman Miller, Chairman Flores, we would completely agree with that. The investment that we're making in these veterans, not only in education, but in some of the job training programs and some of the other programs that the VA has for transitioning service members who are becoming new veterans, is an extremely large financial commitment. I think anything we can do to ensure that we're making the absolute best possible strategic investment, allowing them to make the most of their time and their investment, is certainly worthwhile.
Mr. Bellucci.
Chairman Flores, thank you for the question. Absolutely, we want to see the tracks mandated. After we heard from Dr. Kelly and the other witnesses on TAP mandate, did a little poking around on my phone on the internet, just looked up the code in Title 10 where the Transition Assistance Program is mandated, and it says for employment and training. And I think that's a very important caveat to make. And training is where we talk about the education benefits that our veterans are going to be entitled to. We agree with the military life cycle. We believe that you should prepare your service members for civilian career readiness as soon as they join the military, and it should be a lifelong learning process. However, that doesn't take into consideration the service members that are near their end of time in service, and that's who we're worried about. We're worried that if you have to meet career readiness standards within a finite amount of time as you approach ETS, but you fail to meet those career readiness standards, what happens? The military is obviously not going to retain you. To build on that, we believe in a lot of what Dr. Kelly and Secretary Kelly were talking about with making these resources available to veterans after they transition. We fully support the Marine Corps model, which I believe this legislation is based off of, which offers buy-in, that the Marine Corps can demonstrate success in administering their TAP program. So we're fully behind it, and we believe that it's something that DOD, VA, labor can easily accomplish.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Bellucci. Mr. Gonzalez.
Yes, Chairman. With the TAP program is also essential to not just the transitioning service member, but also to the country as a whole, to society as a whole, economically, which was also seen with the post-World War II veterans who created the long economic prosperity of this country, who became business owners, who became tradesmen, who went to higher education and gained another level of education within themselves, regardless of socioeconomic class. We have not seen this amount of active duty service members transition to veterans since post-World War II. So as a country, we owe it to ourselves, as all of us as a society, to ensure that these service members can be successful as they transition out, and TAP GPS is one of those vehicles to ensure that their success, and they are successful coming out, regardless of what the definition of success is, because that is actually, that'll help our long economic prosperity for the country as a whole.
Mr. Dakduk.
Chairman Flores, we fully support H.R. 631, and my colleagues at the VFW and American Legion with Student Veterans of America. We've worked with the DoD and VA, and we've seen what they're doing to a certain extent, but I fully believe it's a step in the right direction. But HR 631, we want to see that enacted, and we'd like to make the tracks mandatory, especially the education track. I think that's extremely important. The post 9/11 GI Bill is highly complex, but applying to college, getting accepted, going through that process is extremely complex as well. So I think it's absolutely valuable, as well as the entrepreneurship track and the vocational track as well.
Thank you, Mr. Duke. And I'll make one closing editorial comment on 631 and 357. I think it's important for everybody to know that the U.S. taxpayers, according to the CBO, are going to invest $72 billion over the next 10 years in the post 9/11 GI program. So the American taxpayers are in this fully with the states. When you look at the potential impact of HR 357 on the states, we can't forget the federal taxpayers are there alongside our veterans on this issue. And with respect to, and you can similarly extend that to HR 631, if you want to get the best value out of that $72 billion, it makes sense for the education track to be mandatory for those service members that would elect to follow that track. And with that, I want to thank each of you for being here today. I'd like to remind the subcommittee members that hopefully you're going to find out about this, that we're going to be holding a markup on some or all of the bills that we discussed today on April 25th at 10 a.m. in the morning here in 334 Cannon. I ask unanimous consent that statements from the National Coalition of Homeless Veterans and Vets First also be made part of the record today. Hearing no objections, so ordered. Finally, I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend remarks and include any extraneous material in the record of today's hearing. Hearing no objections, so ordered. And thank you for everyone for being here, and we are adjourned.